Sir Leo, yeah. So let's start with the first question. If a film is a time machine, okay, parang time warp, what parts of Filipino history can only be understood through the lens?
Probably all of the movies that were done before cameras or cell phones were commonplace. I've always said it that most Filipinos are actually not fond of recording or documenting. So, to a large extent, the films that were produced at different eras are the ones that tend to be reflective of our culture, our history, our society, our architecture, everything else. If you're doing research, if you look at the text, sometimes a lot of times it's actually very incomplete. But when you see a movie like, say, Giliw from 1939, you will see the behavior of the people, especially since it was set contemporary time at that particular time. You will see the customs, the norms. Even, for example, a movie that we restored in ABS-CBN Sagip Pelikula, Malvarosa. That was 1958 or 1959. And even there, you will see, for example, it was a family of like 8 brothers and 1 sister. So how did the family at that time view women in their role in the family? They're the ones who cook, they did the laundry, they didn't work, and stuff like that. It's really a reflection of how society was at a particular point.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir, how do we train the next generation, like the people here, okay, to see classic films as educational tools rather than yung iba kasi naboboard or boring relics daw?
Yeah. One of the things that we did when we were doing Sagip I can only refer to that because that was the advocacy that we started. I've always said that it was also unfair to blame a lot of young people for not having any interest in old movies. Because if you're not exposed to it, how will you know to look for it? So part of the advocacy was bringing it to the schools, bringing it to different venues, making it accessible for the audience, so that at least if you see it, hopefully your curiosity and your interest will be picked enough so that you would start looking for some of the older movies. Uh, our stand has been, old movies are not going to be for everybody. If you like the newer movies with their fast pacing and fast cuts and more bombast and less drama and whatever, then the old movies are going to look stale by comparison. But if for every 10 people there are like 3 or 4 people that would be interested enough to look at the works of Alamberto Avellano or Manuel Silos or Gerardo De Leon, then to us,
Or Brocka or Bernal,
or
yeah,
a
sorry.
Brocka or a Bernal, for us, the legacy of cinema will continue to be alive. We grew up watching a lot of these old movies on television. But right now, if you go with streaming and cable and whatever, everything is so modern and so contemporary. And to me, if that interest and for that love of cinema, if that dies with our generation, it would be a shame because people would be forgetting all of this. And you hear about Lav Diaz, you hear about Brillante Mendoza, you hear about Antoinette Hadaone. But before a lot of these directors were getting awards or recognition from international festivals, we actually had Broca and Mike De Leon, and we had Bernal, and we had Eddie Romero. So we were actually getting recognized internationally even before. And to me, one of the greatest tragedies would be to forget these actors, writers, producers, directors who had brought honor to the Philippines. Lamberto Avellana, Jerry De Leon, Manuel Silos, they are big names even in the 1940s and the 1950s. If you were to watch, say, Ibong Adarna, which was produced by LVN and was released just before World War II, that was one of the films that we restored in Sagip Pelikula. If you look at that movie, the technology used in that movie was at par with the technology being used by Hollywood. They had like matte plates and everything. So a lot of their fantasy dramas, their Wizard of Oz and whatever, not all of those are sets. So they will have it in sound stages, but for the big backdrops, they would have it on matte glass. So they would have the cameras moving across that. And this is Filipino technology that was being done here, comparable with what was being done in Hollywood. So to us, we were never really behind. Maybe our tastes and the kind of content we were doing were slightly different. But even back then, Filipinos cinema was actually ahead of the curve. In fact, cinema was born in the Philippines ahead of practically everybody else in Southeast Asia, maybe except for Japan. but then that's East Asia. So to us, we have a very, very rich film legacy. Now, if you guys entered through the main hall, you would see there's a big poster of Dalagang Bukid. Dalagang Bukid is officially recognized as the first Filipino film, full-length feature, that was produced in 1919. That's why we had our centennial about 6 years ago, about 7 years ago. But sadly, only 2 minutes of that has survived. So it really is a big problem for us, no. But Filipino history is so rich. From 1919 to about maybe 2010, over 8,000 movies were shot on film stock. Of that, half survive. Of that, one half of that, so about less than one fourth, is actually in a surviving print form that could still be scanned or restored. So imagine 75% has practically been lost to getting a restoration process or an enhancement process.
So parang iba pa rin yung film, ano, Sir
Oh
Leo,
yeah,
no?
yeah.
Yung
And in fact,
yeah.
film is still the most stable preservation medium. I remember when we were setting up the ABS-CBN Film Archives and doing the restoration project, I had gone to the different studios, and they were saying that, like, even in the case of Disney, with all of their green screen work and CGI work that was being done at that time, the moment the film is completed, they will do a backup negative of that completed work, and those negatives are the ones that would be stored in different locations. Like ideally, if you have an archiving setup, they say that there is a 3,000-mile rule. You do not keep masters within a 3,000-mile location. So like for example, if there's a movie that's preserved by the Library of Congress, then you have the movies that are in the Hollywood studios in California. The negatives or prints of that would also still be kept in uh, uh, this, uh, the salt mines or underneath the salt mines somewhere in Middle America. Kasi the point was, if California were suddenly to sink into the water, the movies would still be surviving with their internegatives or interpositives that are kept in different parts of the United States.
Okay, thank you for that, Sir Leo. So let's go beyond the art. What does the loss of film physical prints do to our collective national memory, sir?
Well, the movies not only reflect something that's physical. I mean, you see fashion, you see architecture, you see how the city or the capital looked like when there was less traffic and everything. But I've always also said that it was indicative of the psychology of the people at the time, even behind the camera. Like, for example, when you look at the films, why were certain films box office hits? What was the collective consciousness at the time? Viva Films, when they launched in 1981, this was after martial law was declared. They had a lot of soapy dramas.
Yeah.
So it
The
was like rich
comics
people and
one, ano?
whatever.
Yeah.
Prior to that, during the martial law years, everybody was working around the censorship. So they were trying to come up with movies that would make a political statement. This would be the Ricky Lees and the Mike De Leons and the Lino Broccas and the Marilu Diaz-Abayas, the Kidlat Tahimiks. They would be making movies within the confines of the dictates of martial law. They would try to point out this is the problem with Philippine society, so on and so forth. Now, when after martial law, after the Marcoses had fled, all of a sudden, people were saying, no, we're so tired of reality already. That's why you suddenly had the popularity of the Sinasamba Kita and Gaano Kadalas Ang Minsan and the PS I Love You, where in one final scene, the boy courting Sharon Cuneta goes to the house and the dad will say, you're looking for her, you take the plane. It suddenly became escapist because everybody had had too much of reality already. So these things are a reflection also of what people want. Why do you think there was a rise of rom-coms? And why do you think there was a rise of comedies? Because when life becomes very, very difficult, the cinema will offer a 2-hour escape from the drudgeries of life. At the same time, why did Brillante become famous and a lot of the other directors who were doing what we call poverty porn? Because for a lot of people outside of the Philippines, all of this is like new to them. They're seeing all of these glossy French dramas and British productions and whatever. Then you suddenly have well produced but still poverty porn about life in the Philippines where everybody is in abject poverty and there's crime and there's sex and there's all of these other things. So
So that's
so
the
it is
different genre, ano,
yeah.
Sir
But
Leo,
but
yeah.
but then it becomes a reflection also of what people are trying to avoid or trying to escape. why do you think there's been a rise of superhero movies? Because if you look at the news is crap. Everything that's happening around the world right now is, it's swinging right, it's swinging left. There's so much corruption and whatever. And at a certain point, even if you want to be optimistic about life, there is a certain helplessness that sinks in. So when that happens, who's going to save the day? Superman or the Marvel superheroes or all of these other things. People want hope, and sometimes you cannot find hope in reality, so you escape. So you look at it, all of the movies that are becoming popular is also a reflection of what's happening around the world. Uh, when I was working in television, one of the things that they would say would distinguish a Channel 7 and ABS-CBN before was the ABS-CBN audience was poor but hopeful. The GMA audience was poor but exasperated. So they say ipinapasa Diyos or they leave it into the hands of God. And that's why the audience of those two channels were not crossing. You would think that one would move to the other and whatever. But then you can also see that in the kind of programming we were produced, one was more hopeful, one was more fantastical. Because it addressed their very, very specific concerns. So even with movies, it's like that. Movies will always reflect what people want or either what they want to escape from. So just look at the kinds of movies that are popular at specific times. I think it happens also even in the States or even in Europe and whatever. So just be more, I guess, but discerning and see, these kinds of movies are working right now because life is challenging. People want something different. People want escape. People want hope.
Okay, thank you for that, Sir Leo. One last question. What is the most urgent step we need to take to ensure our cinematic heritage survives the next and the next century, sir?
Actually,
Yeah.
the most important thing there is really get the younger people interested. Because as I said, if it dies really with our generation, then that's the end of it. We are actually the opposite of Europe. I was talking to some friends from Europe, and they say the problem with the Europeans is we are so concerned with the past. The problem with the Filipinos is they do not care for the past. So we have to find that middle ground where the value of the past will actually be recognized and made important. Now, I don't know if you've noticed it or if you participate in a lot of websites right now. There seems to be a growth in nostalgia websites. So whether it's Manila Nostalgia or Obscure and Lost Television Media, but even if you go on Facebook or any of those other sites, there's actually a lot of young people, usually Gen Z and maybe Gen Alpha, that are looking at all of these historical things. They're looking at old TV shows. They're looking at old stuff. Why do you think vinyl is making a comeback? Why do you think other stuff from the past is coming back in? I think part of it is also a search for identity. Part of it, I think, is a search for connecting to your past. Why is it, for example, that a lot of Filipinos who are second generation abroad uh, find that they like going to the Philippines and they like meeting their grandparents and they like meeting their neighbors and they're, this is where my dad and my mom used to court each other. This is where they grew up. On a deeper level, it's really looking at your identity as a Filipino rather than you're somebody who's been assimilated by another culture. At the same time, it's maybe hopefully being proud of it. Like for example, in tennis, di ba? Right now, everybody is so gung-ho about Ayala. Because unlike politicians who are bringing us one embarrassment after the other, you suddenly have somebody who's bringing honor to the country. Why do you think people latch on to Pacquiao also whenever he fights? Because at least for that fleeting moment, there is Filipino dignity in place. With the movies also, when people suddenly discover, oh my God, this is the work of a national artist, or this is the work of somebody great and whatever, it's not something that's causing national embarrassment. It's actually brought honor to the country, and it's just a good way to remind us that Filipinos are great. Filipinos can be good. We can actually do something beyond killings and beyond stealing money for floods and whatever. So to us, it's actually a deeper thing, and I think that's why people are also looking for it more and more now, because we seem to be desperate for something to be proud of. Just to add to that, no,
Yes,
For
Sir
most
Leo,
of
just
you,
one sad
but
thing lang na napansin ko,
mm,
in terms of preservation,
yeah.
So we keep on repatriating those films na nasa overseas, pero sa atin talaga we lost so many,
Well, from a very technical standpoint kasi, the Philippine weather is one of the worst to keep films in. It's too hot and it's too humid. Why do you think we have never had a case of, oh, we found this old print that's still survivable in an old movie house? In all likelihood, that's already melted. Weather conditions here are not ideal for any preservation.
Yeah,
Cooler
because of the
weather.
humid weather, right?
Well, yeah, yeah. Plus the
Sobrang
fact
init,
that
Yeah.
for a lot of producers, what do they do with the movies after they've been shown? There's no afterlife. There's no, if you have a before the onset of streaming and whatever, if you had a Umatic copy or a Betacam copy, as far as you're concerned, I don't need to keep the prints. You have to remember, having a film vault is a very, very expensive front-loaded expense. You have to have humidity control. You have to have temperature control. You have to have actually a physical vault. And unlike a movie that can fit in a thumb drive now, when you're talking of film reels, and I don't know how many of the people here are familiar with how film reels are, you're talking of something that's like this big, and each reel is about 20 minutes long. So when you have a movie that's clocking in at 2 to 3 hours, you're really looking at a lot of reels. So if you have a vault, if you have a tape, it's just one place there, and the equivalent space could be occupied by maybe 50 tapes and maybe 1,000 thumb drives. So that's also a primary difference. So a lot of people would keep it in under their beds or in a cabinet and whatever. But unless you have the humidity control, when there's notorious power outages and brownouts and whatever, all of those will eventually end up being damaged.
Okay, yes.
So
So
and
thank you
then
for that, Sir Leo.
for people, there are still a lot of surviving movies right now. But when you talk to people, why don't you want to invest in preserving or restoring them? Some will even say that, you know, young people don't appreciate the old movies anyway. So it's a lot of cost for very little return. So if you're a businessman, that's how we're going to look at it. The Philippines also has a very, very short copyright protection window. Unlike most countries, which are at 75 and the US is at 95, the Philippines is only at 50 years. And when I was working with the network, I was saying that, this is something that we have to change because a lot of the content will eventually enter public domain far quicker than content of the others. But, unless they really want to pursue it, if your movie is not protected by any copyright protection, what incentive do you have to even try to preserve it? Because once it is violated, and believe me, a lot of Filipinos, I mean, we did a lot of restorations before, and one of the reasons why we didn't really want to go into DVD and Blu-ray, you'll have to spend a lot to manufacture them, and then when you go to social media, everybody's asking, oh, where's the pirated download so we can watch it for free? Unless that whole setup gets fixed up also, there's really a lot of disincentive for people to do the restoration and the preservation.
Okay, thank you for that, Sir Leo. So we'll try to open the floor po kung merong gustong magtanong to Sir Leo Katigbak.
Yeah.
Yeah, about film
I hope I
preservation.
don't
Yeah.
speak too fast, but I always do. Sorry.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Any question po?
Whatever.
Yeah.
Gossip, if I can answer that, I will tell you also.
Yeah. Okay. Meron.
You might want to watch Sisa, the movie by June Lana, which stars Hilda Coronel.
Okay. Just curious, Sir Leo, how many films, the
Did
total
ABS?
number, did
We were able to
ABS?
in
So
13 years, we were able to restore 240 movies.
So
The oldest
yeah,
movie we were able to restore was Giluko from 1939.
39.
We were able to do 2 pre-World War II movies, Giluko and Ibong Adarna. And then we were able to do about another 10 LVN movies covering 1948 to 1960.
So imagine, kung wala po ang ABS-CBN, so we were not able to watch all those great films.
Well,
no?
the other thing also, you have to remember, LVN produced something like 350 movies. Of the 350 movies, about 100 survive in some form. So that means incomplete reels and whatever. The ones that survive that are full is only about 25 to 30. So it's 10%, less than 10% actually.
Okay,
So
yes.
that's the condition. When you talk about Sampaguita, it's even less than that. When you talk about Libran films, it's non-existent. So because to be honest, and it's something that I'm very very proud of, the idea of preservation and restoration actually hit the public consciousness when ABS-CBN did the Sagip Pelikula project, because that's when people started realizing that, hey, there's value in this movie. And you know, it's really a thankless job when you think about it, because I have been approached by people who say, why will you spend 2 million to 3 million on a brand new movie? Just give it to us so that on restoring an old movie. So just give it to us so we can restore, we can do a brand new movie. And my general answer is, why will your brand new movie be a classic unlike this one's 20, 30 years from now? I mean,
Yes.
it's a catty comment, but you know, that's really how I feel about it. And one of the joys of being in restoration is when you're actually approached by young people at the end of the movie. And they're saying that, oh my God, we never realized that we did such good movies before. Thank you so much for restoring it and allowing us the chance to see it. And then people, for example, descendants of the people who made the movies from the 1940s, 1950s, I have never seen the work of my grandfather, uncle, mother, or whatever. Thank you so much. Now I realize that when my parents talk about them and how good they are and the legacy they did for Philippine cinema, they were not lying, because now I have seen their greatness. And to me, that's one of the most rewarding statements that you can hear. Just one last anecdote, no. I remember we were premiering Captain Barbell. This is a Dolphy movie from 1973 in Santolan Town Plaza. And then, as we were premiering it, Captain Marvel was actually showing on the other cinema. And there was this young guy, but maybe 19 years old, who approached me. And he said, is it okay for us to watch Captain Barbell, which starred Dolphy? And I looked at him and said, don't you mean Captain Marvel? Because they just opened and everybody's talking about it. And he said, no, Captain Barbell. And I said, how, you're too young. How do you know about a 1973 movie? And he said, because my father is a fan of Dolphy and he would always take us to watch the Dolphy movies. So we have appreciated why he is the king of comedy. So if you have tickets to spare, we would want to watch Captain
Captain
Barbell.
Barbell.
And fortunately, I had cancellations for the premiere, so I gave them the tickets. But to me, that is so heartwarming. Imagine a 19-year-old asking to watch a 1973 movie over a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie.
One last, Sir Leo. Now that we have streaming, so how do you feel pagka halimbawang napapirate yung mga ABS-CBN movies na restore?
Well, I think the moment it goes on streaming, you really cannot do anything about it. Eh. And then when you look at movies, really, di ba sinasabi nila that like cinema is dead and whatever. Ultimately, movies, you don't associate it with a theater. Movies as an art form, if for as long as it can be watched in any platform and whatever, you really have to give it to the audience already, where they want to watch it. For me personally, I'd still rather watch it in the big screen. I'd still rather hear people laughing together. To me, it's a communal experience. If you're watching it on a small screen and you're typing and you're whatever, there is so much nuance and so much detail that you miss out because you're so distracted.
Yeah.
But when
Daming
the lights are closed,
distraction,
yeah.
sir? Dami,
But you
Yeah.
know, when the lights are closed and you have your popcorn, assuming that they allow you to eat popcorn in the theater, and everything, it is so nice to just focus, forget everything else, watch what's on the screen. If it's something that's a tearjerker, you hear sniffles from people around you. If it's scary, you see some people jumping from their chairs and whatever. And to me, that's part of the joy of watching a movie in the cinema. You get the total experience. It's like sense around, but with other people.
So, iba pa rin. Parang pag nagsa-sound ka, iba pa rin yung hawak ng vinyl,
Yeah.
no?
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
why I see it's also making a comeback.
Yes.
And I think it's also a
Totoo
lot of
yun,
young
sir. Yeah.
people driving it. So if
Yeah.
you're interested in old movies, please keep that interest, continue that interest, and make sure that it lives
Yeah.
on beyond us.
Okay, yes.
They don't know what sense around is.
Well,
Okay.
I guess it's like I guess closest is like Dolby Atmos with the way no in association, because it's hard to explain eh. So with Dolby Atmos they're saying that the sound is coming all over. But when we were younger, the way they promoted movies was sense around. So yes, yeah. It's like a very tactile experience when you're in the cinema. I guess another close association if you're watching it in 4DX. Yeah, that would
Oo,
be
tama,
another
no?
close
Yeah.
association with it.
maganda yung nakikita yung mga Gen Z, ano, they were digging those
Yeah, I'm so
vinyl,
happy nga.
no?
Everybody's young.
Oo, no?
About
Yeah,
90% is young.
those Gen Zs, ano, kesa mag-TikTok, ano, sir, ano, di ba? Oo. Maganda yung
Yes.
ganong
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, I think
yes,
they're
question.
who is asking? Okay.
Yes,
Yes.
name
I
please, yeah.
oh yeah, hi, good afternoon.
Wait.
Sorry.
Can I stand? It's easier for me if I stand. Yes.
Oh yeah, good
Yeah.
afternoon. Um, I'd w- I'd like to po sana I was really interested in the topic of piracy.
Okay.
'Di ba, since our what we're trying to discuss is how to preserve our records
Yes.
efficiently. I have this thought about piracy and really the discourse online or in general that especially in our generation, siguro the younger generation, think piracy is obviously so general agreement, piracy is bad. But in a way, especially in our generation or in most recent times, it's also sort of a way for us to access, especially the
Correct.
older films.
Correct. That's understandable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'd really like to understand your idea or your thought in general about the discourse on piracy. Is it siguro my question is, does it bring more good than bad? Especially if our goal is to make
Watch the
cinema more
film, ano?
accessible
Oo.
for people to
Yung accessibility, Sir Leo.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. There are two sides to it. Let me start with the first side. You have to remember that whether it's a restored movie or whether it's a movie that was produced by people, it's people who put in a lot of hard work and whatever. And when you pirate it, it diminishes what all of these people did. So, for example, whether it's in terms of lost box office or lost revenue or whatever, that's one side of it. That's actually also one of the reasons why, generally as a rule, when I was with ABS-CBN, I never agreed that movies should be for free. Because you have to admit that Filipinos, they always like the bargain. So to me, yes, like what they're doing right now, let movies be 50 pesos or 280 pesos instead of 400 pesos. But don't make it for free because as far as people are concerned, when it's free, it has no value. Now, movies, whether they're good or bad, restored movies, whether they're old or more recent, they do have a value. But when you keep giving it away for free, it diminishes it. It's a psychology. When you go to Atiangge, di ba your favorite is, pwede ba tumawad? What discount can I get? Or aren't you happiest to buy something when there's a freebie that's attached? But how do you look at the freebie? Di ba the freebie is a throwaway? You don't see the value in the freebie. So to me, it's the same thing with the movies. Now, I also understand what you mean by access. And yes, for a lot of these ones, having the movies available for free in whatever website also make sure that you can watch the restored movies and a lot of this other content. But you kind of have to weigh. You kind of have to toe the line at some point. Because like, for example, I remember before, people would always say, we want to watch your restored movie. Please schedule it and whatever. But I'm not stupid. I know that in the grand scheme of things, in the totem pole, we are actually at the lowest. You might have your Hollywood blockbuster, your Star Cinema movie, your Cinemalaya, then you have your reissue, then we're here at the bottom. Would you honestly tell me that if we say that, oh, we have this classic, say a Sisa, and then you say that, and you have a party or you have a gimmick and whatever, that you would ever prioritize an old movie over your party or your gimmick? Hindi naman eh. So to me, that's one of the things that you have to look into. Yes, the free access would be great. To me, it would be wonderful if people see the movies there. But I also hope that there would be enough interest that if there was something that was paying, you would also go into that. Don't just expect that everything is going to be for free. I mean, that's my take on it. Because with me, every time there's piracy, there's potentially somebody who's losing their job. Somebody who's not going to be hired. Somebody who's going to be starving. Now, maybe it's an ideal thing to look at, but that's the reality. It's a business that's not robust. It's a business that is literally hanging by its fingernails. So every lost income, every cheat that happens is to the detriment of somebody in that industry. That's my take on it.
Okay, another question po before we wrap it up.
Well, if you're not in a rush, I'm here already. I can take questions, and traffic is going to be bad where I'm going home. So if they're willing to keep this open, I can answer your questions. Yes,
Yes.
Hello po.
Yes.
Good evening
name
po,
please, yeah.
Sir Leo Katigbak.
Yes.
I'm Jerica Masculino from Adamson University,
Oh,
and
I've talked in Adamson before.
I'm currently doing my thesis research titled Beyond Sagip Pelikula, an examination of FDCP, PFA initiatives and technical machinery in restoring and preserving Philippine classical films. And based po sa RRL namin, there are a lots of gaps, especially after the cease of ABS-CBN Sagip Pelikula because of the shutdown and the financial
Yes.
constraint. And because of that, marami rin po kaming inaral about FDCP, PFA. PFA. So, marami rin po kami nakitang gaps and most likely about financial.
Yes.
Bukod pa po sa climate.
Because it is expensive to restore.
Yes.
So that is sadly a reality.
Yes, and ayun po, based po sa mga na-study po namin from chapter 1 to 3 po. And sabi niyo po kanina na yung Filipinos po, wala po silang masyadong pake sa past,
Yes.
lalo na sa old movies.
Yes.
But naiintindihan ko rin po yun kasi marami pong nagtatrabaho, maraming busy po ang lahat sa pag-survive. So,
No. Let me just interrupt you there lang.
Okay.
I think having a sense of history is not predicated on your financial status. I think it's a function of education. So if from the very beginning you are actually taught to appreciate the past, I don't think you have to spend a lot of money to do that. Parang in the same way that I remember I was talking to a friend of mine who's a composer, and she was saying that, Leo, the reason people keep saying that people don't appreciate the orchestra or orchestral arrangements. But if you expose it, you play it on the radio, people will appreciate because it is beautiful music. And I remember there was one time I was at the Cultural Center of the Philippines, and outside they had the Philippine Philharmonic playing. And everybody, there were maybe about 150 to 200 people. None of them would qualify for middle class. Everybody was poor. But they were there, they were applauding, they were moving with the songs that were being played. So I think time is not necessarily an issue there. I think the appreciation comes really with education. But sorry for interrupting you. Before, please continue with your
yes,
question.
thank you po sa answer niyo po. Kasi yun din po hinahanap kong sagot po. And,
Okay. So I
Nakuha
preempted
niya.
it. Okay. Okay.
But yung major question ko po is, can I ask po if the government can do something for us para po ma-save yung restoration and preservation
Yung
here
para
sa
tuloy-tuloy,
Philippines?
Sir Leo.
Okay, you were right. You're right. A lot of it hinges on budget and on financials. But I guess ang naging advantage namin with ABS-CBN because it was a private company was when they tasked me with it, I was very, very cognizant of the fact that I also had to make money out of it. So when we did film restoration, which eventually became Sagip Pelikula, it was already a two-pronged approach from the very beginning. That's why we are unlike a lot of archives in Asia. In a lot of archives, they will do the restoration. Then after the restoration, they'll have a handful of screenings. Then they will put it back in the vaults. In the case of ABS-CBN Sagip Pelikula, what I did was, restoration and those exhibitions is only 50%. The other is exposing it to a lot of other people. That's why if you remember, we actually did have tie-ups with malls. I would have mini film festivals that were all restored titles. But that also has attendant costs. Like for example, I had to clear music. So if you were just showing it in a festival, you are actually exempt from music clearances and music rights. But the moment that you have a more commercial platform, you do have to clear music. I was the one that started the iTunes business of ABS-CBN. And I'm proud that when we started, there were a handful of Filipino titles on iTunes. But by the time I was done with it, we had about 280 titles on iTunes. And that's a mix of restored and the newer titles. And we are the only Filipino company that has an actual catalog in iTunes. So you have to look at all of those. So now, hopefully, I don't know if that's something that I will have the luxury with the Philippine Film Archive and the FDCP. Obviously, it's government. There are restrictions on how you make money and whatever. A lot of it will be free screenings and whatever. But to the extent that we can bring it more outside to the audience, and assuming, for example, that that all of that would be free and whatever, we will do that because it's important. The advocacy of Sagip Pelikula, I think, is one of the things that works because it actually contextualized what we were doing in film restoration. It's such an easy concept. Rescue film, Sagip Pelikula. So you, in the same way that you have Sagip Kapamilya for disasters or Bantay Bata, saving the children and whatever, Sagip Pelikula, in a nutshell, was really preserving our Filipino heritage so that future generations of Filipinos will be able to enjoy and appreciate those movies. And you know, to be, isn't it, when you're in the States, for example, and you talk to families, everybody sees The Wizard of Oz. Everybody sees the Ten Commandments. Everybody sees The Sound of
Gone with the
Music.
Wind.
Oh, Gone with the Wind. It's a generational thing. So even the younger people will still remember a movie that's like maybe almost 100 years old. Here in the Philippines, it's very rare. That's why also when you watch American programs or even European programs, a lot of pop culture references pop in. They appear in dialogue and whatever, and everybody's able to pick it up. Here in the Philippines, you do a pop culture reference to something in the 1980s, and somebody's going to look at you with the blankest stare because it went over their heads. And to me, that's sad, and it's actually wrong because Filipinos are so witty. But your wit naman cannot be just on the present. It has to go over the entire spectrum also. So that's why to us, it's important that if the films are exposed, you will see why FPJ is the king of action. You will see why Dolphy is the king of comedy. You will see why Temptation Island was such an iconic movie. Di ba? You will see why Darna, even when Vilma Santos was Darna, why it was so popular before. You will see why Nora Honor is a national artist because of not just her filmography, but the fact that she produced some of the best Filipino movies around. Di ba? So you will see all of that by exposing all of the movies.
Okay.
I hope I
so,
answered your question.
okay.
I didn't ramble on. Yeah.
So another one before we
Anybody
wrap it up.
else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Ask away, even if it's gossip.
Good
will
good
try to
morning,
answer.
sir.
Ay,
Good
ma'am,
afternoon
ma'am
pala.
pala siya.
Apo. Sir,
Sorry.
basically, thank you so much for that film, no? It was based on Noli Me Tangere.
Yes.
Yeah. It's so important kasi these are our foundations, di ba?
Yes.
And it's so like our values. So
Yes.
people need to know this. Basically, perhaps the most younger, the elementaries or the high schools, they should see this because it's so basic eh. And I mean, it was pointed out basically the values of our being Filipinos. I so love it actually. I just saw it now, and to think I'm this old already. So
We're probably not that far off. So
so basically, I find it so very very connected.
yes.
I connected with it so much, and everything was so clean.
Yes.
Thank you so much again. That's my comment. Thank you so much.
You know, part of the advocacy we have was really even talking to the organization of academicians, PACE, and some of the others. And you know, sadly, we always offer the older movies for them to watch. But sometimes, even they themselves, the teachers would tell us, can we pick something recent like Magic Temple or Sede Munting Principe or something that's like maybe 30 years ago as opposed to 50 years ago? Because their attitude is the students will not be able to identify with it. It's too old. Which is consistent with some of the comments that, why will we watch old movies? They're either too old, they're dead, they're dying, we cannot relate to them. And sadly, funny as it sounds, it is actually a very heartbreaking reaction when you're pitching a lot of the older movies, when you're pitching a lot of the older content. I grew up at a time, earlier, actually, I just had a conversation with some people, and people were saying, "Oh, you know, the technology right now. All of these kids come in and they do the computers, whereas our grandparents, for example, would probably have a hard time doing the TV remote or the aircon remote." But you know, I always said that I would probably never trade the era where I was born because in my age group, I have actually seen the most in terms of technology change. I mean, from 8-track to, I remember vinyl that was like different colors and whatever, all different speeds and whatever, different kinds of machines. There were 2-inch tape machines that used to run programs and whatever. And now you go all the way through your Macs and your iPads and all of this technology. I've seen all of it. That's why I'm hoping that at least with the job that we have right now, we can help cross over a lot of the old stuff into the newer stuff. Parang, because we can still relate somehow to the old and whatever, and maybe bridge it for people. But
Sir,
you know, but it's
res-
really,
but
it's really sad.
yeah, but results work are part of the school curriculum, and they can how can we know if you don't show them to them? Di ba? Parang they have
Correct.
basic,
But I cannot shove it down people's throats. I can
yeah.
keep offering it, but
I
if the
mean,
teachers themselves or the principal or the other academicians say, "No, I'm sorry," there's nothing I can do. In the same way that we can have as many free screenings here as you want. But if you say, "No, I'd rather go to the park, I'd rather go to a concert, I'd rather go here and whatever," we cannot force you.
but
There
this
has
should
to
be
be
part
there
of
has to
their
be interest.
school project or something.
No, I agree. I agree.
you so
But,
much.
but I also have a lot of comments about the educational system here. So, but I leave it at I leave it at that.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Who else?
So
Who
that
else? Who
so
else?
okay. So
Yeah. You were raising
we-
your question earlier. Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. One last before we wrap it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
ako okay lang.
Oh, yeah.
I actually don't mind.
Are there any ongoing preservation projects that you're able to talk about?
Okay. There were some remaining projects on ABS-CBN that I had that I was talking to FDCP if they could take it on. I don't know if you're familiar with High School Circa 65, which is a Mario J. De Los Reyes film. So maybe the Film Archives could do that. Right now, there's actually a lot of material, especially from government agencies. So we're doing a lot of scanning for those. The other day, we were just doing a movie that was submitted by the ROTC, which is like a military cadet training and whatever. And it covered a certain part of the guerrilla warfare during World War II. I was surprised at the quality of the material. And that entire movie, all Filipinos, was in English. And it just amazed me how well everybody spoke English back in the day. So we're looking at that. There are a couple of Lino Brocka classics that we're looking at, but we're in the final stages of discussion. There are movies from the Sampaguita catalog, which is like pre-1960, that we're trying to look at. We are also looking at turning over the remaining ABS-CBN LVN titles to the FDCP, and if they can continue that. Movies from the 1940s, late 40s, 1947, 48, 49. So that's that. The main dilemma working with government is budget, as always. Restoration is not cheap. So we're looking at ways where we can train our people better so that we could do restoration in-house. Because there are certain movies that you can actually do in-house. If the damage is not that severe, it's like what we did with ABS-CBN. If I cannot do a pristine restoration, I call it scanned and enhanced. So that pretty much means that, yes, we've probably eliminated 90% of the defects, but you would still see scratches and some warpage and whatever. But that's still better than nothing, as opposed to, say, a pristine restoration, which could be very, very expensive. So if we can do stuff in-house, that's one thing. The other thing also is a lot of the companies we deal with are international companies. So with the peso being the way it is, their rates can actually remain the same. Like for example, I'm talking to Kantana in Thailand. When I was in Thailand, maybe 2017, the peso was at 43 and the baht was at 41. Now, the peso is at 59 and the baht is at 31. So from parity,
ganun
we are
kabilis
now
ang
at
Sir Leo.
double the rate.
Oo.
So even if they tell me that they're giving it to me at X amount, it has doubled, the cost has doubled for us without us doing anything. So that's really the thing. Now, we're talking to the British Film Institute because there's a movie that we're going to restore with Retrovata in Bologna. And they have given us a discount already. But when I was in ABS and I was dealing with Retrovata, the exchange rate of the euro was about 52 because the dollar was about 46. Now, the euro is what, 65? So you can just imagine that even if with the discounted rate, our cost has actually gone up by 15 to 20%. And that's without taxes coming into play. So you have all of that. Hopefully, well, I just joined FDCP maybe 6 weeks ago. So you were trying to go through as fast as we can. We're looking at all of the material, the inventory. Sadly, this is the other reality. The inventory of ABS-CBN is extensive. That's why we were actually able to do a lot there. I was doing the negotiations also. I was able to secure a lot of the rights of the movies. And if it's any indication, there are about 450 movies that I was able to get prints done, which are the only surviving copies of those movies here in the Philippines. So, but it was a private company. And then when the chairman talked to me about it, he said, and you know, thank you to the chairman of ABS, Gabi Lopez, because he had the foresight for restoration. And he said, Leo, we know that we have to do this. I just don't know how we will recoup our money. And I said, Gabi, the only thing that I can promise you is I will be very, very judicious and very, very practical in the way that I spend the money of ABS. And just for everybody's sake, we actually didn't lose money on a collective basis. We actually made money. But anyway, with government actually, now we have to start looking at how we can bump up the restoration. And for a lot of them, we're probably going to do it in-house if we can. And for the marquee titles, we will do it with the Retrovatas and the Cantanas and the other facilities outside.
Okay,
you
with
so
that,
much,
Thank you so
Paul.
much, Sir Leo.
I had one
Yeah.
more question about that. I love this movie, Sisa. It was very
Yes.
good. For those young people that are interested in film preservation as a
Yes.
career, do you have any advice for them?
Sadly, there's no school here in the Philippines. But what's interesting is there are a lot of younger people willing to accept internship and training in like ABS before and whatever. But a lot of the really good restoration facilities and whatnot, they have it in Korea, they have it in Japan, they have it in Europe, obviously, with the British Film Institute and the French Institute. If any of you have a chance, though, to go to Hungary, I went to the Hungarian Film Archives. And I was so impressed with the setup. I didn't realize it was that extensive, how they were doing film restoration. And I was surprised that they had film laboratories with multiple film scanners, both dry and wet gate, plus a lot of other things. And I said, if you're just doing older movies and restoring older movies, why do you have so much equipment for film? And they said, because people are going back to film. Half of our output right now is back on film. Directors want to do music videos on film. Some of our producers right now are looking at doing their movies on film. So to me, that's very heartwarming because to me, film is actually a more stable medium. If we had the money, ideally is if you've done a restoration, you turn it back into a print because like Kodak says, under the most ideal conditions, in the right vault, their film stock will survive for 700 years. So the problem with digital is obsolescence. Technology keeps changing, and then a lot of it is not backward compatible. So, for example, you have LTO tapes and other things. They're telling me to wrap up. They have a lot of these things. They won't be compatible 2 generations back. So the thing is you have to keep migrating. But the problem with that is when you keep migrating film or you keep migrating materials. So the same thing with your hard drives and whatever files you have, your photos and whatever. You have to keep checking them because just because you transferred it doesn't mean that you maintain the quality of what you transferred. It could be a corrupted file already. So, di ba? Garbage in, garbage out. So if it's already corrupted, that's the thing. So that's the dilemma when you're going full digital with preservation also. You have to also look at the back end of it. You have to ensure and see that it is in the same quality that you're transferring it. With the print stock, it's there. It's a front-loaded expense. You have the vault and whatever. But if it's there and it's in the ideal condition, it will not undergo vinegar syndrome. It will not go any deterioration. If there are people who are checking it, you can actually just check it once a year. Maybe rewind it to unspool it to make sure that there's no adhesion.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, so with that, we wrap up our discussion. Okay. Thank you
If anybody has
very much.
questions, I'll still be lingering about a bit. So, because traffic.
So we've come to the end of our session. So we'd like to thank again po the FDCP, the Film Development Council of the Philippines, and Cinematheca Intramuros. Okay.